On Thanksgiving, my son asked if I loved the lake house he bought me. I stared at him across my tiny dining table and whispered, "What lake house?" My daughter-in-law slowly lowered her wine glass. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that a single question over Thanksgiving dinner could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. For the past 3 years, I had been surviving, not really living. At 68 years old, I worked part-time cleaning offices at a medical building in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My knees hurt every morning when I climbed out of bed, and some months I had to choose between filling my blood pressure prescription or paying my heating bill on time. But I never complained. Not to my son. Not to anyone. Mothers from my generation weren't built that way. The smell of roasted turkey still lingered in my little apartment that evening. I had spent nearly 2 days preparing Thanksgiving dinner even though my grocery budget barely allowed it. The turkey had cost almost $70, which meant I would be eating canned soup and toast for the next 2 weeks. Still, I wanted everything perfect. My son Nathan used to love my stuffing when he was little. He once told his third-grade teacher that no restaurant in America could make mashed potatoes better than his mom's. I still remembered how proud I felt hearing that. Back then, he used to call me every Sunday. Back then, he used to need me. Now our conversations lasted less than 5 minutes. Busy week, Mom. Client meetings. Traveling again. Always another excuse. After my husband Walter passed away 4 years ago from a stroke, Nathan changed. Or maybe he had already been changing long before that, and grief simply made the distance impossible to ignore. He became successful very quickly after college. His software company exploded during the pandemic, and suddenly he was appearing in local business magazines wearing tailored suits and expensive watches. I was proud of him. God, I was proud of him. Even when he stopped visiting regularly. Even when holidays became rushed obligations squeezed between business trips and vacations with his wife's family. That Thanksgiving afternoon, I stood in my tiny kitchen peeling potatoes while watching snow fall outside my apartment window. The building was old and drafty. Cold air slipped through the corners of the windows no matter how many towels I stuffed there. My arthritis had been especially bad that week, and twice I had to stop cooking just to massage feeling back into my fingers. But when Nathan called that morning saying they were finally coming for dinner, I forgot all about the pain. They meant him and his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa always looked like she belonged in a magazine. Perfect blonde hair. Cream-colored coats. Nails that probably cost more than my monthly phone bill. She had never been openly rude to me. That almost made it worse. Everything about her politeness felt rehearsed, carefully measured. Like someone pretending to like a coworker they secretly looked down on. When they arrived around 4 o'clock, the hallway outside my apartment suddenly smelled like expensive perfume and cold winter air. Nathan hugged me quickly with one arm while checking something on his phone with the other. "Hey, Mom." I held onto him for an extra second anyway. "You look tired," I said softly. He laughed. "That's what happens when you own a company." Vanessa stepped inside behind him carrying a bottle of wine so expensive I was afraid to touch it. "Happy Thanksgiving, Carol," she said with a polished smile. Her eyes drifted briefly across my apartment. The old carpet. The second-hand furniture. The tiny dining table I had extended with a folding card table just so all 3 of us could fit comfortably. Something flickered across her face. Pity maybe? Or embarrassment? I couldn't tell anymore. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Nathan talked about expanding his business into Arizona. Vanessa described a luxury resort they had visited in Sedona the month before. I mostly listened while passing bowls of food around the table. Sometimes wealthy people forget that talking constantly about money around struggling relatives can feel like slowly pressing on a bruise. But I didn't say anything. I never wanted Nathan to feel guilty for succeeding. At one point, he looked around my apartment and frowned slightly. "Mom, your radiator's still making that noise?" I smiled. "It's fine. The superintendent says he'll look at it eventually." "You should have called me." I manage. That word sat heavily between us. Manage. Older women say it all the time when what we really mean is survive quietly. Vanessa sipped her wine and glanced at Nathan. That look lasted barely half a second. But I noticed it. I started noticing many things after Walter died. Silences. Expressions. The spaces between people's words. Nathan suddenly leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone completely comfortable in his life. "By the way, Mom," he said, "how's the lake house?" I blinked. "The what?" "The lake house I bought you." He smiled casually while reaching for more turkey. "You've had it almost 2 years now. I figured by now you'd be spending every summer there." The room went completely still. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window. I stared at him, certain I had misunderstood. "Nathan," I said carefully, "I think you have me confused with someone else." His smile faded. "What?" "I don't own any lake house." Vanessa's hand tightened around her wine glass. Nathan laughed once, uncertainly. "Mom, very funny." "I'm not joking." The silence that followed felt strange and heavy, like the air before a tornado siren. Nathan slowly lowered his fork. "What do you mean you don't own it?" "I mean exactly that." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. "I've never owned a lake house in my life." He stared at me now. Really stared. Not the distracted glance he usually gave me during rushed holiday visits. For the first time in years, my son looked fully present. "Mom," he said slowly, "I bought you a house on Lake Redstone almost 2 years ago." My heartbeat quickened. "What?" "It's in your name." I handled all the paperwork through my assistant. I felt suddenly dizzy. Lake Redstone was beautiful property. Rich people vacationed there during summers. Waterfront homes sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. People like me did not own homes there. "Nathan," I whispered, "I swear to you, I don't know what you're talking about." Vanessa abruptly stood up from the table. "I just remembered," she said quickly, "I need to take a call." Neither Nathan nor I looked at her. His face had gone pale. "Mom," he said quietly, "there were monthly payments too." I frowned. "What monthly payments?" "The support transfers." His forehead creased. $1,500 every month for taxes, utilities, maintenance. The room tilted slightly around me. $1,500. Every month. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Nathan." My voice cracked despite my efforts. "I haven't received anything." He stared at me like I had slapped him. "That's impossible." I shook my head slowly. "I'm behind on my electric bill right now." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Nathan slowly turned toward the kitchen doorway, where Vanessa stood frozen with her phone in her hand. The expression on his face changed. I had seen that expression before only once in my life. When Walter realized a business partner had stolen money from his construction company 30 years ago. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. The terrible moment when trust begins collapsing in real time. "Vanessa," Nathan said quietly, "what's going on?" She swallowed hard. "I'm sure this is just some misunderstanding." But her voice sounded wrong. Too fast. Too tight. I suddenly remembered all the birthdays she insisted on hosting at expensive restaurants while quietly paying the bill before I could even look at the menu. All the times she'd ask strange questions about whether I planned to move closer to them. All the moments she insisted Carol shouldn't worry about finances. Not kindness. Control. Nathan reached for his phone immediately. "I'm calling Rebecca." Vanessa stepped forward too quickly. "Nathan, wait." But he was already dialing. I sat frozen at my little dining table while the remains of Thanksgiving dinner cooled around us. The turkey. The stuffing. The pumpkin pie I woke up at 5 in the morning to bake. Everything suddenly looked different. Not warm. Not comforting. Just fragile. Like the life I thought I understood. Nathan put the phone on speaker. "Rebecca," he said immediately when his assistant answered, "I need you to pull up the Lake Redstone property documents." There was a pause. Then keyboard clicking. "Yes, Mr. Turner," the woman replied. "The property purchased for your mother in November 2 years ago?" My stomach tightened. "Yes. I have the file right here." Nathan looked directly at Vanessa now. "Read me the mailing address." Another pause. Then, 847 Willow Creek Drive, Unit 4B. I felt cold all over. "That's not my address," I whispered. Nathan's face drained of color. He slowly turned toward his wife. Vanessa looked like she might collapse. And in that moment, sitting inside my tiny apartment while snow fell quietly outside, I realized something terrible. Someone had stolen an entire life from me. And somehow, my daughter-in-law knew exactly where it had gone. Nathan ended the call without saying another word. For several seconds, nobody at the table moved. The radiator beside the window hissed loudly, filling the silence in my tiny apartment. Outside, snow continued drifting past the streetlights, soft and slow, as if the entire world had no idea mine had just cracked open. Vanessa finally sat back down, but she no longer looked polished and composed. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath one eye, and she kept twisting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Nathan stared at the table. Not at me. Not at her. Just the table. I had not seen my son look lost since he was 14 years old and accidentally backed Walter's truck into the garage door. Back then, he had immediately confessed. This time was different. "Mom," he said quietly, "how long have you been behind on bills?" I hated that question immediately. Not because of the money. Because of the shame. Older people learn to hide struggle carefully. Especially mothers. Especially widows. We trim pieces off our dignity slowly to survive, then pretend we never missed them. I forced a small smile. "It's nothing serious. Mom. The electric bill's a little late." I folded my napkin carefully. "And I've been spacing out my prescriptions." Nathan looked horrified. "You told me you were fine." "I am fine." But even I could hear how tired my voice sounded. Vanessa suddenly spoke. "Carol, why didn't you say something?" I looked at her then. Really looked at her. And for the first time in years, I noticed how rehearsed her concern felt. Not warm. Not natural. Strategic. "I didn't know I was supposed to," I replied softly. Nathan leaned back slowly, rubbing both hands over his face. "I've been sending money every month for almost 2 years. My chest tightened hearing that. 2 years. While I counted quarters at the pharmacy. While I stopped buying fresh fruit because it spoiled too quickly. While I wore the same winter coat Walter bought me 12 years ago because I couldn't afford another one. I suddenly remembered the afternoon my car battery died in the grocery store parking lot last February. It had been 15 degrees outside. I sat in the freezing car for almost an hour waiting for roadside assistance because I didn't want to bother Nathan during an important investor meeting. All that time, my son believed he was already helping me. The thought hurt more than the poverty itself. Nathan stood abruptly and walked toward the kitchen window. "When did the address change?" he asked without turning around. Vanessa hesitated. I don't remember." He finally looked at her. "You don't remember?" "It was a long time ago." His jaw tightened. Something inside their marriage had shifted. I could feel it happening right there in my apartment. Tiny cracks spreading under pressure. I should have felt satisfaction. But mostly I felt tired. So unbelievably tired. Because the truth was, part of me still wanted this to be some ridiculous misunderstanding. Some clerical mistake. Some confusion that could be fixed with paperwork and apologies. Families are strange that way. Even after betrayal begins revealing itself, love keeps trying to defend the people hurting you. Nathan picked up his coat. "I need air." Then he looked at me again, and the guilt in his eyes almost broke my heart. "Mom, why didn't you tell me things were this bad?" I gave a small shrug. "You were busy building your life." The words came out gentler than I intended. That only made him look worse. After he stepped outside onto the apartment balcony, silence settled over the room again. Vanessa reached for her wine glass, but didn't drink. Her hands trembled slightly now. For years, I had convinced myself the distance between Nathan and me was normal. Adult children moved away emotionally. Lives changed. Priorities shifted. That was what everyone said. But suddenly old memories started resurfacing differently. Small moments I had ignored. Dismissed. Explained away. Like the Christmas 3 years ago when Nathan insisted on wiring me money for a vacation, but Vanessa later called saying, "Oh Carol, there was a banking issue. We'll resend it after the holidays." The money never came. Or the time Nathan mentioned helping me with house repairs, and I laughed because I hadn't repaired anything in years. At the time, Vanessa smoothly changed the subject before I could ask questions. I remembered all of it now, each memory sliding into place quietly, like puzzle pieces I never wanted to assemble. Vanessa cleared her throat. I think this is getting blown out of proportion. I almost admired how quickly she recovered. Almost. You think so? I asked calmly. She crossed her arms. Nathan handles too many financial accounts. Things get mixed up. But not for 2 years. She didn't answer. The pumpkin pie sat untouched in the middle of the table now. I had spent all morning making it from scratch because Nathan used to love it when he was a boy. Suddenly it looked foolish. Like all the other things mothers keep doing long after people stop appreciating them. Vanessa stood and began gathering plates too quickly. I'll help clean up. You don't have to, I said. I insist. But I noticed something then. She wasn't cleaning to help me. She was cleaning because nervous people need movement, need distraction, need something to do with their hands while panic grows quietly inside them. I watched her carry dishes into my tiny kitchen, and for the first time, I stopped seeing her as simply cold or materialistic. No, this was something else. Something deliberate, careful, long-term. Nathan returned 10 minutes later with snow melting on his shoulders. His face looked different now. Harder. Older somehow. I called. The property manager, he said flatly. Vanessa froze in the kitchen doorway. And? I asked carefully. Nathan looked directly at her before answering. He says someone's been living in the lake house. A strange coldness spread through my chest. Who? Nathan swallowed once. Then he said the words that changed everything. Vanessa's brother. Vanessa's brother. The words landed quietly, but they hit harder than shouting ever could. I stared at Nathan, certain I had misunderstood him. Excuse me. Nathan removed his glasses slowly and rubbed his eyes. The property manager said Trevor's been staying there for over a year. His voice sounded strained now. Apparently everyone thought I knew. Vanessa immediately stepped forward. Nathan, listen to me. You told me Mom was living there part-time. I was trying to help my brother get back on his feet. With my mother's house? Her face tightened. It wasn't like that. But even she didn't sound convincing anymore. I sat there quietly while the last pieces of Thanksgiving dinner cooled around us. The gravy had formed a skin on top. The dinner rolls were going hard. Somewhere down the hallway, another apartment television played football too loudly. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. And yet nothing in mine felt ordinary anymore. Nathan turned toward me again. Mom, did you really never receive any paperwork? I shook my head slowly. Nothing. No letters? Tax forms? Insurance documents. I would remember owning a lake house, Nathan. His shoulders dropped heavily after that. For the first time all evening, he looked less like a millionaire businessman and more like the exhausted little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. Only now the storm was inside his own marriage. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're acting like I stole something. Nathan looked at her in disbelief. You redirected my mother's property and financial support for 2 years. It was temporary. You forged her address. I handled paperwork. Her voice rose sharply now, bouncing off the cramped apartment walls. I noticed something then. Vanessa wasn't panicking because she felt guilty. She was panicking because she was losing control. People like her survive by controlling the story. The moment facts begin slipping away from them, anger usually arrives first. I never touched any of the actual ownership documents, she said quickly. The house is still legally in Carol's name. That's supposed to make this better? Nathan asked. Vanessa looked toward me suddenly. Carol, tell him I always treated you well. The sentence almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was revealing. After years of distance, polite smiles, forgotten birthdays, and carefully managed conversations, she still believed kindness was measured by appearances. No yelling. No obvious cruelty. No slammed doors. As if betrayal only counted when it was loud. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. You treated me carefully, I said softly. That's not the same thing. Her face changed instantly. People become uncomfortable when older women stop pretending not to notice things. Nathan walked toward the table again and picked up his phone. I'm calling Trevor. Vanessa stepped in front of him. No, that one word came too fast. Too sharp. Nathan stared at her. Move. Nathan, please. Let's talk privately. We're talking. Her breathing quickened. He has nowhere else to go. And my mother does? The room went silent again. I looked down at my worn sweater sleeve and noticed a small tear near the cuff. I had stitched it twice already over the winter. Meanwhile, somewhere on Lake Redstone, another family had been living comfortably inside a house meant for me. Using heat I was afraid to turn on. Looking out over water I had never even seen. Something inside me shifted then. Not anger exactly. Clarity. A very cold kind of clarity. Nathan finally reached Trevor on speakerphone. His brother-in-law answered casually. Hey man, happy Thanksgiving. Nathan's voice was flat. How long have you been living in my mother's lake house? Silence. Then, what? You heard me. More silence. I could almost hear Trevor thinking. Calculating. Then he sighed. Vanessa said you were fine with it. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. For 2 years. It was supposed to be temporary at first. Temporary. Funny how selfish people always use temporary to justify permanent damage. Nathan paced toward the window again. You've been using utilities, maintenance accounts, tax payments, everything I set up for my mother. Trevor sounded defensive immediately. I didn't ask for all that. But you accepted it. Vanessa suddenly grabbed her coat from the chair. I'm leaving. Nathan turned around sharply. No, you're not. I'm not staying here to be humiliated. The irony of that sentence settled heavily over the room. Humiliation. I thought about the times I quietly watered down soup to make groceries stretch longer. The Christmas I mailed Nathan a scarf from the clearance rack while pretending I simply liked practical gifts. The mornings I cleaned office bathrooms while wealthy executives avoided eye contact with me in the hallways. Humiliation had apparently been acceptable as long as it belonged to me. Vanessa moved toward the door anyway. Nathan blocked her path. Did you ever plan to tell me the truth? She looked away. That answer hurt him more than words would have. Finally, she whispered, I didn't think it mattered. I felt something heavy settle in my chest hearing that. Not rage. Grief. Because that was the real betrayal. Not the money. Not even the house. The belief that my life had become small enough not to matter. Nathan stared at his wife for a very long time. Then he asked the question that changed the entire direction of the night. What else don't I know? Nobody answered Nathan's question. Not immediately. The old wall clock above my stove ticked loudly through the silence. Every second seemed sharper now, heavier somehow. What else don't I know? He repeated. Vanessa looked trapped. Not emotional. Not remorseful. Trapped. There's a difference. People who feel guilty usually look at the person they hurt. People trying to protect themselves look for exits. Her eyes kept drifting toward the apartment door. I think everyone's overreacting, she said finally. Trevor staying there was never supposed to become this huge issue. Nathan laughed once. A short, bitter sound. You stole from my mother. I did not steal anything. You redirected money and property meant for her. It was still technically hers. The argument sounded ridiculous even to her now. I stayed quiet. At my age, you learn silence reveals more than shouting ever will. Nathan leaned both hands against the kitchen counter. How did you even pull this off? Vanessa hesitated too long. And that hesitation told us everything. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I realized this wasn't just one lie. It was a structure. Carefully built. Maintained over years. I handled some paperwork when your assistant was overwhelmed, Vanessa said quietly. That's all. Nathan stared at her. You changed my mother's mailing address. You travel constantly, Nathan. Things needed managing. Managing. Another interesting word. People always soften ugly things with tidy language. Manipulation becomes management. Lying becomes confusion. Stealing becomes helping. I slowly stood from the table and began gathering empty plates. Neither of them moved to stop me. For years, I had cleaned up emotional messes quietly while everyone else focused on themselves. Tonight felt no different. Only now I could finally see the entire picture. As I rinsed dishes in the sink, old memories kept resurfacing one after another. Small moments, forgotten conversations, tiny details that suddenly looked different. 2 summers ago, Nathan had called asking, "Mom, did the welcome package arrive yet?" At the time, I assumed he meant something related to his company merchandise. Before I could ask questions, Vanessa smoothly interrupted. "Oh, she probably means the grocery delivery, honey." Nathan accepted the explanation immediately. I remembered another moment too. Last spring, I mentioned my apartment rent increasing by $90. Nathan had looked genuinely confused. "I thought your housing expenses were covered." Vanessa answered before I could. "She means utilities." Again, the conversation moved on before I understood why his reaction seemed so strange. The memories kept coming now, like floodwater breaking through a damaged wall. Nathan suddenly spoke again. "How much money are we talking about?" Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "There were maintenance costs, taxes, repairs, how much?" Her silence answered him. Nathan grabbed his phone again and stepped toward the hallway. "I'm checking the transfer records." Vanessa followed him immediately. "Nathan, stop." "No, you're doing this in front of her?" That sentence caught my attention instantly. "Not, I'm sorry." "Not, I can explain." "Not even, I made a mistake." Her concern was humiliation, exposure, image. Nathan looked exhausted now. In front of her, he repeated quietly, "Vanessa, this happened to her." She opened her mouth, but said nothing. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel Walter bought years ago from a hardware store Christmas sale. The fabric had faded thin with time. Funny the things people keep. My husband used to say, when someone shows you who they are, pay attention the first time. Back then I thought he sounded cynical. Now I wondered if he had simply lived long enough to recognize patterns earlier than I did. Nathan scrolled through his banking app in silence. Then his expression changed again. Not shock this time. Something worse. Jesus Christ. My chest tightened. "What is it?" He looked up slowly. The monthly transfers weren't $1,500. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Nathan swallowed hard. They were $5,000. I nearly dropped the dish towel. 5,000. Every month. For 2 years. I automatically started calculating in my head. That amount could have changed everything about my life. A safer apartment. Proper healthcare. Heat during winter without fear. A reliable car. Groceries without counting pennies. Maybe even retirement someday instead of cleaning office buildings until my body finally gave out. Meanwhile, I had been clipping coupons for canned vegetables. Nathan looked physically sick now. "There's over $100,000 missing." Vanessa's voice sharpened instantly. "It wasn't missing." "Then where's it?" "You invested most of it anyway." Nathan stared at her. "You spent my mother's support money?" "It benefited the family." I noticed she still couldn't say benefited me. Only the family. Meaning herself. People reveal their priorities in moments of panic. Nathan sat down heavily at the table again. For a while nobody spoke. Outside, snow continued falling steadily across the parking lot. A plow truck crawled slowly down the street pushing slush aside under flashing yellow lights. Ordinary winter things. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of the past 2 years kept collapsing quietly inside me. I thought about all the overtime shifts I accepted last Christmas because my rent had increased. I remembered icing my swollen knees alone after scrubbing office floors at midnight. And through all of it, my son believed he had already made sure I was safe. That realization hurt more deeply than the betrayal itself. Because Nathan had failed me. But not in the way I originally believed. He wasn't neglecting me. He had trusted the wrong person. Vanessa suddenly looked directly at me. "You really had no idea?" The question sounded almost genuine. I met her eyes calmly. "No," I said softly. "But I think you counted on that." Her face paled slightly after that. Nathan stood again. "Tomorrow, I'm taking Mom to the bank myself." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "Nathan, no more explanations tonight." His voice had changed now. Quieter. Colder. The kind of voice people use after trust dies. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in years, My son truly saw me. Not as someone aging quietly in the background of his life. Not as a responsibility. Not as an occasional holiday visit. He saw the woman who had been surviving while everyone else assumed she was already taken care of. And I think that realization shattered him more than the missing money ever could. Nathan stayed the night on my couch. I hadn't seen him sleep in my apartment since Walter's funeral 4 years earlier. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of cabinet doors opening quietly in the kitchen. I found him standing in front of the refrigerator wearing socks and staring blankly at leftover turkey. For a second, he looked 10 years old again. Just tired. Just lost. "You okay?" I asked softly. He gave a small nod that didn't mean yes. "I can't believe this happened right in front of me," he said. I poured us both coffee even though it was too late for caffeine. Some habits come from motherhood and never leave. You feed people when they're hurting. Even grown men with million-dollar companies. Nathan sat at my tiny kitchen table while snow pressed softly against the windows outside. "I thought you were comfortable," he admitted quietly. "Vanessa always told me you preferred living simple." I wrapped both hands around my mug. Simple and struggling aren't the same thing. His eyes dropped immediately. That sentence stayed between us for a while. The truth was, I had hidden many things from Nathan too. Not because I wanted pity. Because mothers spend their whole lives trying not to become burdens. After Walter died, I downsized from our small 3-bedroom house into this apartment because I couldn't maintain the mortgage alone. I sold furniture quietly. Jewelry quietly. Even Walter's fishing boat quietly. Nathan offered help once. I refused too quickly. Pride can become expensive when you get older. But I never imagined someone else was already accepting help in my name. Around 2 in the morning, Nathan finally asked, "When did things start getting this bad financially?" I stared into my coffee for a moment. "Probably after the surgery." "What surgery?" I looked up slowly. "My knee replacement last year." His forehead creased immediately. "Mom, Vanessa told me your insurance covered everything." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because at that point, every answer somehow became worse. "It covered part of it." "How much did you pay out of pocket?" "Enough." "Mom." "About $23,000. Nathan looked physically ill hearing that. "You paid that yourself?" "I had savings. But not anymore." I didn't say those words out loud. He leaned back heavily in his chair and rubbed his face again. "I sent extra money around that time," he whispered. Of course he had. The room suddenly felt colder. I thought about the months after surgery when I learned to ration pain medication because the refill costs were too high. I remembered standing in line at the grocery store calculating whether I could afford eggs and laundry detergent in the same week. Meanwhile, somewhere else, $5,000 a month had been flowing steadily into a life that was never mine. Nathan looked toward the living room where Vanessa's overnight bag still sat near the couch. "She lied about everything." "No," I said quietly. "Not everything." He frowned. I chose my words carefully. People usually mix truth into lies. That's what makes them believable. He stayed silent after that. At 7 the next morning, Nathan drove me to the bank himself. The snowfall had stopped overnight, leaving the city covered in fresh white silence. His black SUV looked strange parked outside my aging apartment complex. Too expensive. Too polished. Like a visitor from another world. During the drive, Nathan barely spoke. His jaw remained tight the entire time. I watched familiar streets pass outside the window. The pharmacy where I bought discounted prescriptions. The diner where I occasionally cleaned tables on weekend mornings for extra cash. The bus stop I stood at during freezing Iowa winters because repairing my car cost more than the car itself was worth. Nathan followed my gaze once. Then quietly asked, "You took the bus to work?" "Sometimes." His grip tightened on the steering wheel. I think wealthy people often assume poverty looks dramatic. But most of the time, it looks ordinary. Worn shoes. Delayed dental visits. Soup stretched across 3 meals. Silence. That's what makes it invisible. At the bank, the branch manager greeted Nathan immediately. Apparently, wealthy clients receive different smiles than elderly women cleaning office buildings. Her tone changed completely once she realized who I was. "Mrs. Turner," she said carefully, "would you like to sit in my office?" Nathan answered before I could. Yes. Inside the office, they printed stacks of documents. Property taxes, transfer histories, maintenance payments, insurance statements. The pile kept growing. I stared at page after page carrying my name beside addresses I had never seen. It felt surreal, like reading about someone else's life. Nathan flipped through the records faster and faster until suddenly he stopped. "What is this?" The branch manager adjusted her glasses. "That appears to be a secondary authorization request." My stomach tightened. Nathan looked up sharply. "Authorized by who?" She hesitated before answering. "Your wife." The room went silent again. Nathan stared at the paper. "She added herself to my mother's account access?" The manager nodded carefully. "Limited access authorization. Signed approximately 18 months ago." I leaned forward slowly. "That's not my signature." The woman looked uncomfortable immediately. Nathan compared the signature page against another document. His expression darkened. "She forged it." Nobody corrected him, because everyone in the room could see it now. The shaky, uneven signature on the authorization form looked nothing like my handwriting. I suddenly remembered something strange from almost 2 years earlier. Vanessa visiting unexpectedly one afternoon with coffee and pastries. She had chatted pleasantly for nearly an hour before casually saying, "Oh, Carol, Nathan needs one quick signature for some insurance paperwork." I barely glanced at the document. I trusted family. Older people from my generation were taught to trust family almost automatically. Now I realized that trust had been weaponized against me. Nathan slowly lowered the papers onto the desk. Then he asked the question neither of us truly wanted answered. How much total access did she have? The bank manager folded her hands carefully on the desk before answering Nathan's question. Mrs. Turner's account authorization allowed limited transfers, address modifications, and account communication access. Nathan stared at her. For how long? She checked the paperwork again. Approximately 18 months. 18 months. That number settled heavily inside me. A year and a half of redirected mail. Redirected money. Redirected life. Nathan let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. She had access to my mother's financial information for 18 months and nobody questioned it? The manager looked uncomfortable. The authorization appeared valid. Because older women sign papers all the time. Insurance forms. Medical forms. Bank forms. Retirement forms. Most people barely look at us while we do it. That realization hurt more than I expected. Invisible people are easy to manipulate. Nathan slowly turned another page in the file. Then his expression changed again. I had begun recognizing the stages by then. Confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally anger. What's this charge? The manager adjusted her glasses. That appears to be a renovation payment. How much? $42,000. I felt dizzy again. Nathan looked up sharply. Renovations for what? The woman hesitated. The Lake Redstone property. I almost laughed hearing that. Not because it was amusing. Because somewhere along the way, my stolen life had apparently become luxurious. Nathan flipped through more records quickly now. Furniture purchases. Dock repairs. Appliance installations. Landscaping. Every page revealed another piece of a life I had never lived. Meanwhile, I had spent last winter stuffing towels beneath my apartment windows to keep cold air out. The contrast felt almost unreal. Nathan rubbed his forehead slowly. She turned my mother into a funding source. The words hung quietly in the office. And the terrible thing was, he wasn't wrong. The bank manager lowered her voice slightly. There's something else. Nathan looked up immediately. What? She slid another document across the desk. About 6 months ago, there was an attempt to refinance the property. Nathan froze. Attempt? The request was denied because ownership verification required Mrs. Turner to appear in person. I stared at the paper. My name sat printed neatly across the top beside financial numbers large enough to change entire lives. I had never seen any of it before. Nathan's jaw tightened hard enough that I could see the muscle moving beneath his cheek. She tried borrowing against my mother's house? The manager gave a small nod. At least according to these records. I sat very still after that. Sometimes shock doesn't feel dramatic. Sometimes it simply feels cold. Very cold. Like your body quietly realizing the world is no longer what you believed it was yesterday. Nathan stood up abruptly. We're done here. But before we left, I asked one question. Did she ever come here with anyone else? The manager looked surprised. Then she checked the records again. Yes. Who? A man named Trevor Dawson. Vanessa's brother. Of course. Nathan closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Outside the bank, the winter air hit hard against my face. Fresh snow crunched beneath our shoes as we walked toward the SUV. Nathan opened my door carefully like he used to when Walter taught him proper manners as a teenager. Funny how grief sometimes turns grown men back into sons. He drove in silence for several minutes before speaking. I'm hiring a lawyer. I looked out the passenger window. You probably should. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. I can't believe I trusted her. Trust. Another dangerous word. Most betrayal stories don't begin with hatred. They begin with trust handed to the wrong person slowly over time. At a red light, Nathan suddenly asked, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me how hard things were? I answered honestly. Because I thought you had your own life. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. He looked frustrated. You're my mother. And you're my son. I kept my voice calm. Children are supposed to move forward. Parents are supposed to stop becoming the center of everything. He looked away after that. The truth is, women from my generation were raised to disappear gracefully as we aged. Don't ask for too much. Don't interrupt busy lives. Don't become difficult. So we learned to survive quietly. Sometimes too quietly. Nathan finally spoke again. She isolated you. I frowned slightly. What? Vanessa. His voice hardened. She kept redirecting conversations anytime money or housing came up. She made sure I believed everything was already handled. I thought back carefully. The canceled visits. The quick interruptions. The polished explanations. The constant, don't worry, Carol. I suddenly realized something painful. Vanessa had never needed to openly mistreat me. She simply needed to control information. That was enough. When we reached my apartment building, Nathan didn't turn off the engine immediately. Instead, he stared through the windshield for a long time. Then quietly asked, How many times did you skip medication to save money? I didn't answer fast enough. And that silence answered for me. Nathan looked devastated. Jesus, Mom. It wasn't every month. That's not better. I looked down at my gloves resting in my lap. Old gloves. The fingertips thinning from years of winters. I managed. There's that word again. I almost smiled. Managing. Surviving. Stretching. Older people become experts at making hardship sound smaller than it really is. Nathan suddenly reached into the back seat and grabbed a folder from the bank. I want copies of everything. For the lawyer? For me. He looked exhausted now. I need to know how much of my life has been fake. That sentence stayed with me. Because betrayal doesn't only steal money. It steals memory. It forces you to re-examine every conversation, every holiday, every small moment you once trusted. As we walked back toward my apartment entrance, my phone suddenly rang inside my purse. Vanessa. Nathan saw her name on the screen. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then he quietly said, Put it on speaker. I answered the phone without speaking. For a second, all I heard was breathing. Then Vanessa said quietly, Carol, can we talk alone? Nathan stood beside me near the apartment entrance, snow melting slowly off his shoes onto the concrete floor. I pressed the speaker button. You're already on speaker, I said calmly. Silence. A long silence. Then, Nathan, this doesn't concern your mother the way you think it does. Nathan laughed bitterly beside me. Are you serious? Vanessa's voice tightened immediately. You're angry right now. I understand that. But Trevor was struggling and I was trying to help family. I looked down at my gloved hands. Funny how quickly people use the word family after hurting someone inside it. Nathan crossed his arms. With my mother's money? It wasn't like that. Then explain it. Her breathing sharpened slightly through the phone. There were investments tied to the property. I planned to put everything back. Planned. Another soft word hiding something ugly. Nathan shook his head slowly. You forged signatures. I handled paperwork you were too busy to deal with. You stole over $100,000. No, she snapped suddenly. I protected assets that would have been wasted otherwise. The hallway went completely quiet after that sentence. Even the distant elevator noise seemed to disappear. I felt something settle coldly inside my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. Because people eventually reveal exactly what they think of you. And Vanessa clearly believed my life was too small to deserve protection. Nathan's voice became frighteningly calm. You thought helping my mother was a waste? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she tried another tactic. Carol never wanted luxury. She liked simple living. I closed my eyes briefly hearing that. Simple living. Interesting phrase. As if struggling to afford medication was a lifestyle choice. As if old women become less deserving once they stop being useful. Nathan looked sick again. You watched my mother clean office buildings while you renovated a lake house in her name. Vanessa spoke more quietly now. I never thought things were that bad. I finally answered her directly. You never asked. Silence again. Then I heard something unexpected. Crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sharp little breaths through the phone. But even then, it didn't sound like grief. It sounded like panic. People cry differently depending on what they've lost. Vanessa wasn't mourning me. She was mourning control. Nathan, she whispered, please come home. Home. That word felt strange suddenly. Because where exactly was home now? The expensive house they shared in Chicago? The lake house bought in my name? Or the tiny apartment where the truth finally surfaced? Nathan looked away toward the snowy parking lot outside. I don't know who you are right now. That sentence hurt her more than shouting would have. I could tell immediately. For years, Vanessa had carefully maintained an image: successful wife, responsible daughter, elegant hostess, helpful daughter-in-law. But people built on appearances usually collapse when someone finally sees underneath. I made mistakes, she whispered. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mistakes are forgetting birthdays. Neither of us spoke after that. Finally, Vanessa said quietly, there are things you don't understand. That caught my attention immediately. Because lies usually grow roots. And roots connect to other things underground. Nathan noticed it too. What things? Another pause. Then, Trevor wasn't the only one using the property. The cold air around us suddenly felt even sharper. Nathan stared at the phone. What does that mean? I can't explain this over speaker. Yes, you can. Her breathing became shaky again. There were business arrangements. Nathan frowned. What business arrangements? But Vanessa didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, did you talk to Rebecca yet? Nathan's expression changed instantly. Rebecca. His assistant. The same woman who handled his paperwork for years. I felt my stomach tighten. Nathan spoke slowly now. What does Rebecca have to do with this? Vanessa hesitated too long again. That silence told us enough. Nathan immediately pulled the phone away and ended the call. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Snow blew softly across the parking lot outside the apartment building entrance. A man in a heavy coat walked his dog past us without noticing anything unusual. That's the strange thing about life-changing moments. The world keeps moving normally around them. Nathan rubbed both hands over his face. Jesus Christ. You think Rebecca knew? He laughed bitterly again. At this point, I don't know what to think. We went upstairs quietly after that. Inside my apartment, the leftovers from Thanksgiving still sat untouched in containers across the kitchen counter. The smell of coffee lingered faintly in the air. Nathan paced the living room while dialing another number. Rebecca answered quickly. Mr. Turner? Nathan didn't waste time. How long have you and Vanessa been handling my mother's accounts together? Silence. Then, I think we should discuss this privately. That was answer enough. Nathan stopped pacing completely. How long? Rebecca's voice became smaller. About a year. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table again. The exhaustion finally started reaching me then. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind that comes when trust collapses piece by piece. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. What exactly did Vanessa tell you? That Mrs. Turner preferred not managing financial matters herself. I almost smiled sadly hearing that. Older women become easy to erase once people decide we are confused, fragile, or disconnected from our own lives. Rebecca continued carefully. She said she had power of attorney access. Nathan looked furious now. She never had that. I didn't know. Another silence followed. Then Nathan asked the question quietly. Was anyone else involved? Rebecca hesitated. And in that hesitation, I realized something terrifying. This situation was much bigger than a greedy brother living in a lake house. Much bigger than redirected mail. There were layers underneath everything now. Finally, Rebecca answered softly, "There's something you need to see." Nathan arranged to meet Rebecca the next morning. Neither of us slept much that night. I stayed awake listening to the old radiator knock softly against the apartment wall while snowplows scraped the streets outside. Every time I closed my eyes, new memories kept surfacing. Conversations I ignored. Questions I never asked. Trust one handed away too easily. By morning, I felt older than 68. Nathan picked me up just after 8. He looked exhausted. His expensive wool coat was wrinkled, and dark circles sat beneath his eyes. Good. Not because I wanted him suffering, but because for the first time in years, he finally looked like someone paying attention. We drove downtown through gray Iowa morning traffic. The sky hung low and colorless above the city. Rebecca had asked to meet at a small coffee shop near Nathan's office instead of the office itself. That's strange, I said quietly. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. She sounded nervous. The coffee shop was nearly empty when we arrived. Just a few people working on laptops and an elderly couple sharing breakfast near the window. Rebecca was already there. Mid-30s. Sharp haircut. Expensive beige coat. The kind of woman who always looked organized. But not today. Today she looked pale. She stood immediately when Nathan approached the table. Mr. Turner. Nathan didn't sit right away. How long? Rebecca glanced at me briefly before lowering her eyes. I never knew everything. That wasn't an answer. Nathan slowly sat across from her. Start talking. I stayed quiet beside him. Rebecca wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. About a year ago, Vanessa started handling more of your personal family paperwork. Her voice shook slightly. She said your mother didn't like dealing with financial matters and preferred privacy. I almost smiled sadly hearing that again. Privacy. Another soft word people use while hiding ugly things. Rebecca continued carefully. At first it seemed normal. She had access to some household accounts already. Nathan leaned forward. When did it stop being normal? Rebecca hesitated. Then quietly said, when I noticed the duplicate transfers. Nathan's expression hardened immediately. What duplicate transfers? Rebecca swallowed. The monthly support payments. Cold spread slowly through my chest again. Nathan stared at her. There were 2 accounts? She nodded. One account under your mother's name. She looked at me apologetically. And another connected to a property management LLC. Nathan frowned. What LLC? Rebecca opened her purse and slid a folded document across the table. Redstone Property Holdings. Nathan unfolded the paper slowly. Then froze. What the hell is this? Rebecca looked miserable now. The company tied to the lake house. I watched Nathan scan the paperwork line by line. Then his face changed again. Not shock this time. Something quieter. Dangerous. Vanessa owns this company? Rebecca nodded once. Not fully. Her brother Trevor was listed too. Nathan looked physically ill. And the support money? Rebecca lowered her voice. Part of it was being redirected through the LLC account. I stared down at the wooden coffee table. The sounds around us suddenly felt distant. Coffee machines steaming. Silverware clinking softly. Normal morning noises continuing while my life kept unraveling piece by piece. Nathan looked up sharply. How much money are we talking about total? Rebecca hesitated again. That hesitation told me I didn't want the answer. Finally, she whispered, approximately $300,000. I stopped breathing for a second. 300,000. I thought about my apartment ceiling leaking near the bathroom last spring. I thought about sewing old socks instead of buying new ones. I thought about standing in Walmart putting groceries back one by one because my debit card balance was too low. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of dollars connected to my name had been flowing somewhere else entirely. Nathan pushed the papers away like they physically disgusted him. How did nobody catch this? Rebecca looked ashamed. Vanessa handled everything personally. And, honestly, she glanced at me carefully. Most people assumed elderly family accounts were complicated. There it was again. Elderly. Complicated. Invisible. People stop questioning things once old women become background characters. Nathan rubbed his jaw slowly. What else? Rebecca looked toward the front windows nervously before answering. There's another property. The air seemed to disappear from the table. Nathan stared at her. What? Rebecca reached into her purse again. This one was purchased 8 months ago. She handed him another file. Nathan opened it, then went completely still. I watched his eyes move across the page, then stop. Finally, he looked up at me. Mom, something in his voice made my stomach tighten immediately. What is it? He slid the document toward me slowly. The property title carried my name again. Only this time, the address wasn't a lake house. It was a luxury condo in Scottsdale, Arizona. I looked at the purchase price and nearly dropped the papers. Over $1 million. My hands started trembling. I've never even been to Arizona, I whispered. Nathan looked furious now. Rebecca spoke softly. The condo's currently occupied. By who? Nathan asked coldly. Rebecca hesitated, then quietly answered, Vanessa's parents. For several seconds, nobody at the table moved. I suddenly remembered last Christmas, when Vanessa casually mentioned her parents, finally retiring somewhere warm. At the time, Nathan smiled and said, that must have cost a fortune. Vanessa simply replied, family helps family. Family. Funny word. It sounded uglier every hour. Nathan stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. Several people in the coffee shop looked over. I'm done protecting her. Rebecca looked frightened now. There's more. Nathan laughed bitterly. Of course there is. She lowered her voice further. The condo and lake house weren't the only purchases connected to your mother's financial profile. Nathan stared at her, then slowly asked, what exactly did my wife turn my mother into? Nathan didn't answer Rebecca's question right away. Neither did I. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too normal for the conversation happening at our table. Outside the windows, people carried shopping bags through the snowy sidewalks downtown. Christmas decorations already hung from light poles even though Thanksgiving had only ended yesterday. Ordinary people moving through ordinary mornings. Meanwhile, I was learning my identity had apparently become a business strategy. Nathan finally sat back down slowly. What do you mean? He asked quietly. Rebecca looked genuinely uncomfortable now. She used your mother's financial profile to secure investment leverage. I frowned immediately. I don't understand what that means. Nathan did. And judging by his face, he wished he didn't. She used Mom's assets and accounts to make herself look financially stronger, he said flatly. Rebecca nodded carefully. Properties under Mrs. Turner's name created additional collateral opportunities. Collateral. Investment leverage. Asset structures. Interesting how wealthy people invent elegant language for ugly behavior. I looked down at the papers again. All those years, I thought I was becoming smaller in the world. Turns out someone else had been making my name larger behind my back. Nathan suddenly asked, how many properties total? Rebecca hesitated, then quietly said, 4. I stared at her. 4. The lake house. The Arizona condo. And 2 more. I felt physically tired hearing it. Not dramatic exhaustion. Just the deep heaviness older people carry when disappointment becomes familiar. Nathan rubbed his forehead slowly. Show me all of them. Rebecca opened a folder and slid more documents across the table. A vacation rental property in Colorado. A townhouse outside Dallas. both partially connected to LLCs tied back to Vanessa's business accounts. And all of them somehow connected to my financial identity. My name appeared everywhere. But my actual life had remained exactly the same. Tiny apartment. Old car. Late utility bills. Discount groceries. It almost felt crueler than simple theft. Because they hadn't stolen from a wealthy woman who would never notice. They had stolen while watching me struggle. Nathan looked furious now. She saw my mother suffering and kept going. Rebecca lowered her eyes. I don't think Vanessa believed Mrs. Turner knew how much money existed. That sentence stayed with me. Because it was true. I didn't know. I trusted people. Especially family. Especially my son. Nathan suddenly pushed his chair back again. I'm calling a lawyer right now. Rebecca nodded quickly. You should. But before Nathan could step away, I touched his arm gently. Wait. He looked at me immediately. What? I chose my words carefully. Don't make decisions angry. His expression cracked slightly then. Mom, she turned your life into some kind of financial shell company. I almost smiled sadly. At my age, anger costs energy. That was something younger people rarely understand. Older women survive by conserving strength carefully. You stop wasting it on screaming once life teaches you how little screaming changes. Nathan sat down again slowly. Rebecca looked relieved. Then she said something unexpected. There's another reason I asked to meet outside the office. Nathan frowned. What reason? She glanced around the coffee shop nervously before lowering her voice. Vanessa's been removing files. Cold spread slowly through my chest again. What kind of files? Nathan asked. Internal transfer records. Authorization copies. Communication logs. Nathan's face darkened instantly. She knows we're investigating. Rebecca nodded once. She came into the office early this morning. I thought back to Vanessa crying on the phone the night before. Not grief. Not shame. Damage control. That was what we had been hearing. Nathan immediately pulled out his phone. I'm freezing every shared account. Rebecca looked alarmed. Do it quickly. His fingers moved fast across the screen while I sat quietly beside him. Funny thing about betrayal. At first it feels personal. Then eventually it starts feeling procedural. Paperwork. Accounts. Lawyers. Signatures. People reducing love into transactions. Nathan finally looked up again. She can't access the business accounts anymore. Rebecca exhaled softly. That's probably going to escalate things. Nathan laughed bitterly. I think we passed escalation yesterday. I stared out the window while they talked logistics. Snow had started falling again lightly. Small flakes drifting across traffic and pedestrians. For some reason, I suddenly remembered the first apartment Walter and I rented after getting married. Tiny kitchen. Bad heating. Second-hand couch. But we had been happy. Not because we had money. Because nobody was pretending. That memory hurt unexpectedly. Nathan's voice pulled me back. Mom? I looked up. You okay? I nodded automatically. But honestly, I didn't know anymore. Because grief becomes confusing when the people hurting you are still the people you love. That's the cruel part nobody talks about. If strangers betray you, anger comes easy. When family does it, your heart keeps fighting your mind the entire time. Rebecca quietly slid one final document toward Nathan. What's this? He asked. Her expression tightened. The insurance policy. Nathan frowned while opening it. Then suddenly went still. I watched the color slowly drain from his face again. By then, I had started dreading silence more than bad news itself. What? I asked softly. Nathan looked up at Rebecca slowly. This policy lists Mom as financially dependent. I frowned. What does that mean? Nathan swallowed hard. It means Vanessa officially represented you as incapable of managing your own affairs. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were insulting. Because they explained everything. The redirected mail. The hidden paperwork. The controlled communication. She wasn't just stealing money. She had been quietly erasing my independence piece by piece on paper. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Wrinkled. Hands. Working hands. Hands that cleaned offices at night and cooked Thanksgiving dinner from scratch. And somewhere inside legal documents, Those hands apparently belonged to a helpless woman who couldn't manage her own life. Nathan's voice became dangerously quiet. She tried to turn my mother into a dependent asset. Rebecca said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth was already sitting there between us. Then Nathan slowly closed the folder and asked the question that made my stomach tighten immediately. How far did she plan to take this? Rebecca didn't answer Nathan immediately. She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands, as if searching for the safest version of the truth. That alone terrified me. Because by then, I had learned something important. People only hesitate when the full truth sounds worse out loud. Finally, she spoke quietly. I think Vanessa was preparing for long-term financial guardianship. The words settled heavily over the table. I frowned. Guardianship. Nathan looked stunned. Rebecca nodded slowly. There were preliminary consultations with an eldercare legal firm about asset protection structures. Interesting phrase. Asset protection. Not family protection. Not caregiving. Assets. I suddenly understood something that made my stomach turn cold. On paper, I was slowly becoming less of a person and more of a financial category. Nathan stared at Rebecca in disbelief. She was trying to legally control my mother's finances? Rebecca swallowed. I don't know if she planned to fully move forward. But there were discussions. I sat very still after that. My entire adult life, I had feared becoming a burden. Turns out someone had already been preparing paperwork to make me look like one. Nathan suddenly stood again. We're done here. This time his voice sounded different. No confusion left. No denial. Only certainty. Rebecca looked genuinely sorry now. I never meant for things to go this far. Nathan gave a bitter smile. They already did. Outside, the cold air hit hard again as we stepped onto the sidewalk. Downtown Cedar Rapids buzzed quietly with post-holiday shoppers and traffic. The world still looked ordinary. That kept feeling strange to me. Nathan opened the SUV door for me carefully. Then he walked around to the driver's side and just stood there for a moment staring at the roof of the car. What now? I asked softly. He looked exhausted. Now I protect you. The sentence almost broke my heart. Because mothers spend decades protecting children. Very few sons realize one day the direction must reverse. During the drive back, Nathan made several calls. Lawyers. Bank representatives. Account managers. Every conversation sounded colder than the last. By noon, shared financial access had been frozen. Property records flagged. Transfer requests suspended. I listened quietly while snow drifted against the windshield. Somewhere during all those phone calls, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the dramatic sense. No screaming. No revenge fantasies. Just clarity. Very sharp clarity. People reveal themselves eventually. Sometimes through cruelty. Sometimes through greed. Sometimes through paperwork. When we reached my apartment building, Nathan finally checked his phone again. Then frowned. What? He showed me the screen. 23 missed calls from Vanessa. Several texts. Please call me. This is getting out of control. You're destroying our family. Interesting. Not, I hurt your mother. Not, I'm sorry. Destroying our family. As if truth itself had become the problem. Nathan deleted the messages without responding. Upstairs, my apartment felt smaller than ever after everything we'd learned. The faded carpet. The weak radiator heat. The old coffee maker Walter repaired twice before he died. I suddenly saw the place through different eyes. Not shame. Evidence. Proof of exactly how successfully I had been erased while wealth moved around my name elsewhere. Nathan walked slowly through the apartment. Then stopped near the bookshelf Walter built 20 years ago. You lived like this while I thought you were financially secure. I folded a blanket carefully over the couch. I lived. That's not the same thing. No, it wasn't. A knock interrupted us. Both of us froze immediately. Nathan opened the door cautiously. Vanessa stood in the hallway. She looked completely different from the polished woman who arrived for Thanksgiving dinner 2 nights earlier. No makeup. Hair pulled back carelessly. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Fear changes people quickly. Nathan, she whispered. He didn't move aside. What are you doing here? I need to explain. You've had 2 years. Her eyes shifted toward me. Carol, please. I stayed seated quietly near the kitchen table. At my age, you learn people become most honest when they realize control is slipping away. Vanessa stepped inside slowly after Nathan finally moved aside. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she looked directly at me and said something I never expected. I never hated you. The sentence hung strangely in the room, because somehow that almost made everything worse. Nathan stared at her in disbelief. You think hatred is the issue here? Vanessa shook her head quickly. You don't understand how this started. Then explain it. She wrapped both arms around herself tightly. It was supposed to help everyone. Nathan laughed bitterly. By stealing from my mother? No, her voice cracked. By protecting our future. Future. Another revealing word. I watched her carefully now. For the first time, I realized Vanessa truly believed her actions were justified. Not morally, perhaps, but practically. That made her dangerous. People who know they're evil sometimes stop. People who believe they're reasonable rarely do. Vanessa finally looked at me again. You were never supposed to struggle. I answered quietly. But I did. She looked down immediately. Nathan crossed his arms. How many people knew? Vanessa hesitated, then whispered, my parents knew about Arizona. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. And Trevor. He knew about the lake house. Who else? She didn't answer. That silence filled the apartment heavily. Because once lies involve multiple people, they stop being impulsive mistakes. They become systems. Nathan spoke slowly now. Did you ever intend to tell me? Vanessa looked at him with tears finally slipping down her face. I thought I could fix everything before you noticed. Funny thing about deception. People always believe there will be time later. Later to confess. Later to repair damage. Later to return what was taken. But later rarely arrives the way they imagine. Nathan suddenly asked the question I think he had been avoiding since Thanksgiving night. Did you ever love my mother at all? Vanessa looked stunned by it. And for the first time since this nightmare began. She had no answer. Vanessa left my apartment crying. But even after the door closed behind her, the silence she left felt heavier than the tears themselves. Nathan stood near the doorway for a long time afterward without speaking. Snowlight reflected faintly through the apartment windows, turning everything pale and tired-looking. Finally, he asked quietly, how did I miss all of this? I folded Walter's old blanket carefully across the couch before answering. You trusted your wife. That's not an excuse. No, I said softly. But it's an explanation. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. For the first time since Thanksgiving, he looked less angry and more broken. There's a difference. Anger wants punishment. Broken people want to understand where reality changed without them noticing. Nathan stared at the floor. I keep replaying everything in my head. I nodded slowly. That was happening to me too. Every Christmas gift. Every canceled visit. Every carefully redirected conversation. The human mind hates betrayal because it forces memory to split in half. Before truth. After truth. Nathan rubbed his eyes. She made me believe you were okay. I looked toward the small kitchen where leftover soup sat cooling on the stove. I helped with that. His head lifted immediately. What? I told you I was fine. You were protecting me. Yes. And she used that. Also yes. But I didn't say it out loud. Outside, wind rattled softly against the apartment windows. Winter in Iowa always sounded lonely after dark. Nathan finally asked, why didn't Dad ever tell me people could do things like this? I almost smiled sadly. Your father did tell you. He frowned slightly. No, he didn't. He told you to pay attention when people benefited from your silence. Nathan went still after that. Walter had said it many times over the years. Usually after business disagreements or family arguments. Back then it sounded harsh. Now it sounded experienced. Nathan looked around my apartment slowly. The old furniture. The faded curtains. The bookshelf repaired twice with wood glue. He was seeing all of it clearly now. Not as simple living. As survival. I should have visited more, he whispered. I answered honestly. Yes. The truth hurt him. But gentle lies would have hurt longer. He swallowed hard. I thought giving money solved things. That's because wealthy people confuse support with presence. Nathan leaned back quietly after that. And honestly, I wasn't trying to punish him. But there comes a point in life where older women grow tired of softening every truth to protect everyone else's comfort. The next few days moved quickly. Lawyers became involved. Fraud investigators. Account specialists. Nathan spent hours every day sorting through documents while I continued going to work because life doesn't pause neatly during heartbreak. Monday night, I cleaned offices downtown until almost 11. As I emptied trash bins and wiped conference tables, I kept thinking about the Scottsdale condo, the Colorado property, the lake house. Entire lives built quietly around my name while I scrubbed fingerprints off corporate glass doors. Strange feeling. Not jealousy. Not even bitterness exactly. Just disbelief. One of the younger janitors noticed my swollen hands while we worked. "You okay, Carol?" I nodded automatically. "Just tired." Again with that word. Older women become fluent in minimizing pain. The next afternoon, Nathan arrived at my apartment carrying grocery bags. Real groceries. Fresh fruit. Steaks. Coffee that didn't come from the discount shelf. I looked at the bags quietly. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," he said firmly. "I did." Something in his voice sounded different now. Not guilt exactly. Responsibility. That was new. While putting groceries away, Nathan suddenly froze beside my refrigerator. "What?" He pointed at the nearly empty medication organizer on the counter. "When were you planning to refill these?" I shrugged lightly. "Next week, maybe." "Mom." I was waiting for payday. The silence after. That sentence felt sharp enough to cut skin. Nathan sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I think that moment hurt him more than the missing money. Because stolen wealth feels abstract to rich people. But seeing your mother ration medication? That becomes real immediately. He covered his face briefly with both hands. She turned you into someone surviving paycheck to paycheck while millions moved around your name. I corrected him quietly. No. She exposed how easy it is for older people to disappear. Nathan looked up at me after that. Really looked. And I think he finally understood something important. Neglect doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it happens politely, gradually, wrapped inside assumptions. The lawyers discovered more over the next week. Unauthorized insurance policies, false dependency evaluations, property tax exemptions filed under elderly care classifications. Piece by piece, Vanessa had been building a paper version of me. A helpless version. An aging dependent woman unable to manage her own affairs. And honestly, that part hurt more than the financial theft. Because money can be returned. Dignity feels harder to recover once people start rewriting your identity. 3 days later, Nathan received a call from Vanessa's attorney. She wanted mediation. Not reconciliation. Not apology. Mediation. Interesting word choice. Nathan listened quietly for several minutes before finally asking, "Does she deny any of it?" A pause. Then he laughed bitterly. "Shared misunderstanding," he repeated. I looked up from my tea. Shared misunderstanding. Another elegant phrase covering something rotten. Nathan ended the call and stared out my apartment window for a long moment. Then quietly said, "She still thinks this is negotiable." I stirred sugar slowly into my tea. People who spend years justifying bad behavior rarely stop quickly. Nathan sat across from me. She could lose everything. I thought about that carefully before answering. So could I. The room went silent again. Because finally, after days of lawyers and paperwork and explanations, we had reached the simplest truth underneath everything else. Vanessa gambled with my life because she believed older women could absorb loss quietly. And, for a long time, she was right. Winter passed slowly after that. Not dramatically. Not with courtroom shouting or cinematic revenge. Real life rarely moves that way. Instead, it unfolded through paperwork, quiet conversations, and long afternoons where truth finally settled into places lies used to live. By February, the legal investigations were nearly complete. The lake house was returned fully to me. The Scottsdale condo and the Colorado property became part of larger financial disputes tied to Vanessa and her family. Several accounts remained frozen while attorneys sorted through years of hidden transactions and forged authorizations. Nathan offered repeatedly to move me somewhere better immediately. A larger apartment, a retirement community, even a home near him. But for the first time in years, I made decisions slowly. For myself. That mattered more than people realize. When you spend enough time being managed by others, even small choices begin feeling sacred. One snowy afternoon, Nathan drove me to Lake Redstone for the first time. The road curved through quiet pine trees dusted white with fresh snow. Frozen water stretched across the horizon like silver glass beneath the winter sky. I sat silently in the passenger seat most of the drive. Not emotional, just thoughtful. Because somewhere between Thanksgiving and now, I had stopped feeling invisible. The lake house stood at the end of a narrow private road. Gray stone fireplace. Large windows facing the water. A wooden porch I had apparently owned for almost 2 years without knowing it existed. Nathan turned off the engine slowly. "I'm sorry, Mom." I looked at the house quietly before answering. "I know." And strangely enough, I meant it. Not because everything was repaired. Some things never fully repair. Trust changes shape once broken. But remorse matters. Real remorse changes people if they let it. Inside the house, everything smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. Most of the furniture had already been removed during the investigation process. For the first time, the place actually felt like mine. Empty. Honest. Quiet. Nathan walked slowly through the living room. "She put your name on everything," he said softly. I ran my fingers along the kitchen counter. But she never imagined I'd actually stand here. That was the real mistake. Not greed. Underestimation. People often assume older women stop noticing once we become quiet. But silence and blindness are not the same thing. Over the next several months, I moved gradually into the lake house. Not all at once. Just little pieces of life returning slowly. Walter's old photographs. My favorite books. The quilt my mother made in 1978. A yellow ceramic bowl I used every Thanksgiving for mashed potatoes. Simple things. Real things. Nathan visited often after that. More than he had in years. Sometimes we sat on the porch drinking coffee without speaking much while the lake moved quietly below us. Grief changes conversations. So does guilt. One evening during spring, he finally asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Vanessa?" The question lingered between us while sunset reflected orange across the water. I answered honestly. "I already do." Nathan looked surprised. I continued softly, "But forgiveness and trust are different things." That took him a while to understand. Vanessa eventually agreed to settlements through her attorneys. Not because she suddenly became honest. Because evidence leaves very little room for performance. Trevor moved out of the property permanently. Her parents sold the Arizona condo. Several business partnerships tied to the fraudulent accounts collapsed quietly afterward. Nathan filed for divorce 3 months later. He never told me every detail. I didn't ask. At my age, I've learned some pain deserves privacy. The strange thing is, I don't hate Vanessa. I tried to for a little while. But hatred requires energy too. And after everything that happened, I became more interested in peace than punishment. What hurt most was never really the money. It was realizing how easily aging women become convenient to overlook. People see wrinkles and assume weakness. They see loneliness and assume confusion. They see quietness and assume absence. But we are still here. Still watching. Still understanding far more than people think. The following Thanksgiving, Nathan came to the lake house early in the morning carrying groceries and a pumpkin pie from the bakery downtown. "I know yours is better," he admitted. I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Together we cooked dinner slowly while snow drifted across the lake outside the windows. No luxury guests. No polished performances. Just honesty. At one point Nathan stopped chopping vegetables and looked at me quietly. "You know what keeps bothering me most?" "What?" "I thought taking care of you meant sending money." I stirred gravy gently on the stove before answering. "No," he waited. I looked at my son carefully then. Older now somehow. Sadder too. And maybe finally wiser. Taking care of someone means making sure they're never surviving alone while you believe they're safe. The room stayed quiet after that. Later that night, after dinner dishes were finished and the fire burned low in the living room fireplace, I stood alone for a moment looking out across the dark lake. 1 year earlier, I had spent Thanksgiving believing my life was shrinking quietly into the background. An old woman in a tiny apartment trying not to become inconvenient. But the truth was something very different. I had never been invisible, only ignored. And there's a difference between those two things. A very important difference. Because people can overlook your voice for a while. They can misuse your trust. They can even try rewriting your life on paper. But eventually, truth has a way of returning home. Just like I finally did.